Welcome, everybody, to a new edition of UFO Man Live. My name is Tim, or UFO Man, and to my side is my friend and my co-host, Tommy Highway. Tommy?
Hi, folks. I'm Tommy Highway. I want to thank everybody for coming out. Really appreciate it. Folks, tonight we have a very somber occasion that we're all experiencing, the 20th anniversary of 9/11, the 9/11 terrorist attacks. We wanted to go ahead and take about 40 seconds of silence. Tim has got a little video we're going to play, and let's all just think about all the folks that were lost on that day.
Okay.
You know, folks, I remember on the 10th anniversary, I had a small child. Someone I was dating had a little girl about 8 or 9 years old. And during the 10th anniversary of the attacks, she turned to me and she asked me, what was it like? What was it like to see that? And I'll tell you, although I fancy myself better than average storyteller, there are no words that you can use to describe the magnitude of what actually happened on that day. So again, let's all never forget that this happened, and let's try to all live our lives a little bit better every day. Okay. Anyway, that being said, folks, I'll tell you, we are very privileged this evening. We have got an author, a researcher, just a heck of a guy. We've got a gentleman here that is such an expert that he has written more books than you actually have toes and fingers. I'm telling you, folks, it is our honor and my pleasure to introduce you to Mr. Preston Dennett. Preston, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, tonight we're going to start out with several subjects based on the books that Preston has written. And I don't know, I counted about 21 books. But he is a very prolific writer. He's covered several subjects on ufology, as well as UFO healings, medical intervention by ETs, which is a niche that we're going to cover tonight. But first off, we have the first question from Tommy Highway. Tommy?
That's right. Again, Preston, thank you very much for being with us, sir. We're very honored to have you. Basically, you've written so many books, and you've covered so much of the topic, the subject, and the mystique, frankly, of ufology. One of the things that I've always been very interested in were the school sightings, the sightings that were made by school children, at the school, during school hours, things of that nature. And I understand that you've written a book about that. I was hoping maybe you could share some of your insights on that.
Yeah, that was something that actually really shocked me. I've been in this field for almost 35 years now, and had no idea this was a thing. There's a few really famous sightings. There was one in Rua, Zimbabwe, Ariel Elementary School. It's pretty well known. A UFO landed, ETs came out, some 200 kids saw this. Another very famous case at Westall High School, Melbourne, Australia. A few other famous cases, Crestview Elementary School in Opelika, Florida. Hillsdale College. They had a landing right in front of Hillsdale College in Michigan, and another real famous case in Wales, actually, Broadhaven Elementary School. But I remember hearing about the Rua, Zimbabwe case, and that's when I started to connect the dots, because I had had a couple myself that I researched. And I thought, is this a thing? Maybe I should dig into this a little deeper. And because the UFO books weren't, there was a few cases in UFO books, but not a whole lot. So I dug into the archives of various UFO organizations. I subscribed to the UFO news clipping service for years. That turned out to be very helpful. And got a real shock. I found not just a couple of these cases, or not 10 or 20. I found over 100.
Wow.
And this is,
Wow.
yeah, I mean, I was shocked. This is definitely a thing. UFOs are absolutely showing themselves over schools on purpose. These are not random flybys by any means, because, you know, maybe the kids are out at recess and they're just looking up. Nope, that's not what's happening here. They began pretty much exactly in 1950. And in these cases, they're different from your average sighting. You know, your average sighting kind of takes place at night. There's maybe 3-4 witnesses, and they see a darting anomalous light. It might hover, but it's usually pretty high up there, several thousand feet. And it's brief, and off it goes. In these cases, they're almost exclusively daylight cases, obviously. But that's an important distinction, because daylight cases are relatively rare. And in these cases, these objects will appear from, you know, high above or the horizon and come right for the school. They specifically target schools and will stop right over them or circle around them at very low levels. And by that, I mean 500 feet would be on the high end. These are very low level sightings. They're also very long lasting. You know, 5 minutes would be on the short end, but more often 10, 15, 20 minutes, 2 hours, or even over a period of days.
Wow.
And
I'm actually not familiar with the Zimbabwe incident. Could you describe that for us?
Yes, I'm surprised you haven't heard of it. It is hugely famous. It's getting a lot of attention. This occurred in September of 1994 in a very rural area, Ariel Elementary School in Rua, Zimbabwe. By the way, half the cases are over elementary schools. I think that's significant. Our youngest kids are seeing these. But the Ariel elementary school case is the ultimate case of this kind. It was multiple UFOs which showed up early one morning in September 1994 and started circling the school, came down and landed next to the playground. And about 200 kids were on the playground. No adults saw this. By coincidence, there was just one adult on the playground. She was minding the snack stand. And kids came running up to her and tried to tell her, but she did not listen, thought they were joking. And this craft landed at the far end of the playground. It's a very large playground. And at least 60 of the students saw this, probably significantly more. But ETs came out, 3 of them. And one of them came right up to the students and actually spoke telepathically with a small group of them, giving them messages, which basically centered around environmental themes, like stop chopping down the forests, or you're misusing technology, pollution, these sort of things, which is a very common message from the ETs, by the way. And really wasn't something that would be on the kids' minds, especially at that age in 1994, when, you know, environmentalism wasn't a hot button issue.
Sure, especially to children.
So yeah, this was an amazing case, investigated first by Cynthia Hind, who is probably, you know, South Africa's at least main researcher, and followed up by John Mack, and now Randall Nickerson has done a documentary on this, which should be coming out not too long. Hopefully, it's been a long time. And yeah, it's just an amazing case, but not unique. It's absolutely not unique.
Isn't Randall Nickerson talking to the adults now that were children back then?
That's right. Yep. Emily Trim, Lizelle Field, I think is her name. And there's a bunch of them. He's talked to dozens or scores of them, and the teachers, of course. And yeah, I mean, this is absolutely a thing. Of the 100 cases I collected, this shocked me too. 30% involve landings or humanoids.
Wow.
And I recently found a bunch more. I got a hold of Albert Roselli's series, The Humanoids Amongst Us. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I missed a bunch of them. I'm pretty upset because there's far more than the 100 I presented.
Right.
Well, I mean, if they continue to show up at schools, it's obviously not an accident. And you're, to your point, you're absolutely right. Daytime sightings are hen's teeth. They are incredibly rare. And just like the Australia incident, in fact, I watched a special on that recently, where they actually interviewed the children who are now aging adults, let's say, that were on the ground and actually witnessed the Australian incident. They drew photos of it, and everybody was drawing the same photo. I mean, pretty much. It was just incredible. But it's just really interesting to know that so much of this is happening in front of our schools, in front of our children.
Yeah, the ETs are doing, I mean, this is my assessment, that they're doing a publicity campaign, and they're very careful about it. They go from school to school to school, from area to area. The Hillsdale, Michigan sighting occurred in, let's see, I believe it was March of 1966. 2 weeks later, that's when the Melbourne, Westall case happened. The Opalaka incident was exactly to the day 1 year later.
Wow.
It was funny. Yeah, when the Hillsdale incident happened, Jim and Cora Lorenzen, pioneering UFO researchers, said, we're getting an awful lot of these cases over schools. We predict this will happen again. And boom, 2 weeks later it did. And at the same time, Raymond Fowler, of Betty Andreasson fame,
Right.
and the Allagash abductions, he's one of my favorite researchers out there.
Right.
He said the same thing. He says, this was in 1966. He said of the 15 cases he had that spring, 8 were over schools. And very low level.
Were any of the craft sighted at these schools the same type of vehicle?
Often it's your typical flying saucer, but I have to tell you, it's the entire gamut of shapes and sizes. It's one of the weird things about this phenomena is how varied it really is. So we have people describing, cigar-shaped craft, boomerangs, saucers, of course, spheres, manta ray, weird shapes that are hard to describe, blobs of light, pyramidal, almost square shaped, like one guy described it as a school bus almost floating in the air. But it's amazing because this is another thing that differentiates this from pretty much any sighting out there. Because there are a number of sightings where they're widely viewed, 10, 20 people, thousands of people in a few, like the Phoenix Lights or Hudson Valley and some of these others. But in these schoolyard cases, there's nothing like them. These are involving 40, 50 people on the low end, and not exclusively kids by any means. Over half have adult teachers watching this. And I started looking for anything that's at all parallel to this. And there's, it's not happening at sporting events. It's not happening at concerts. It's not happening at any other outdoor event. But I did finally find one that is strikingly similar. And that was another real shock. And I ended up writing a book about that too, which is UFOs over drive-in theaters.
Oh, let's talk about that. I used to love the drive-in. So that's happened as well then.
Yeah, and it's pretty much exactly the same deal, except it's at night. But this started again precisely in 1950. And these are low level sightings. And I cannot emphasize it enough. They come right over the screen or to either side. So we're talking near landings, feet above the ground, stay for a long time and put on a display. They flash their lights. They will start darting around. They will release smaller craft. It's like they know people are looking for a show, and they don't disappoint. They put on a show.
Wow.
And our government knows. They know, despite all their denials, starting in the early 50s. I found there's one case in Bakersfield, California, at the Terrace Drive-In, which is typical of what happened in these cases. A lot of these early cases had military witnesses, which is why they got any publicity at all, because there were some trained observers there who reported it. And this one guy was a sergeant, I believe, at the Terrace Drive-In in Bakersfield, and reports it to the local sheriff's station. He starts getting a bunch of calls, and finally just goes down there. Sheriff Leroy Hatfield goes to the terrace drive, and there's still 100 people there who had described the same thing. This cylindrical object dropped out of the sky, hovered right above the screen like they do, flashed its lights, and took off. It's a brief sighting for this type of sighting, but very much in your face, very brazen. And so he takes interviews about 20, 30 people, writes it all down, and everyone else wanted to talk to him. He's like, that's enough. My arm's tired. I know what you saw. And he submits it to the Air Force. And the closest Air Force base was Edwards at that time. Don't even get me started on Edwards. They're neck deep involved in this stuff. Oh, but at any rate, it gets routed to Project Blue Book, or the precursor. And a report is written up the very next day, marked action. And they send it to the commanding general at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, to the top. Also to Ent Air Force Base in Colorado, where we track, incoming and outgoing traffic. And get this, to the head of intelligence at Washington, D.C. So they were taking it very seriously. Got the documents. I looked them up. We've got all these Blue Book documents now released. Not one of these cases made the unidentified list on Blue Book. They absolutely did their best to deny it, even though it was clear to them that this was not anything normal.
So do you agree then that a lot of sightings are identified because they already know what they are?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Blue Book was a whitewash. J. Allen Hynek, the astronomical consultant, became so disgusted with it. And interestingly, it was the Hillsdale, Michigan case, the Hillsdale College UFO landing, which, they hovered there for 2 hours and actually landed. It was that case which just broke. He says that was the low point of his career. That was it. He couldn't take it anymore. And he got out of Blue Book. Actually closed down shortly later, 1 year later. But Blue Book, he said that they would pay all kinds of attention to anything that was, obviously Venus. And if it was clearly unexplained, they would attack the witness. They would try to find a way out of it, or just not pay attention to it.
Sure.
There was, if I could, one other case. Ray Fowler investigated a case over Beverly High School. And briefly, there was these 3 UFOs. One was 50 feet over the building. 3 ladies came. Well, first it was a young girl who saw it. She called her mother. And 3 ladies went to the high school, which they lived next to, and saw these objects. This is one of the few cases which took place at night. And one of them waved their hand at one of the closest objects. It came swooping down and hovered about 20 feet overhead, scared the living daylights out of them. She soiled herself. Wow. And they ran back, called the police, got more people. There was a crowd of 10 people watching this. They called the police. The police show up. They're like, all right, who called about the plane? And they pointed to the UFO, and the police were obviously shaken. They got out of their cruiser and were looking at it going, wow. Raymond Fowler interviewed them. Well, finally these objects take off and go over to the nearby college, which was right next door. I forget the name of the college. It was like 3 miles away. And do a little display over the college and then take off. And the Air Force does a cursory investigation. Don't even interview the witnesses. They didn't investigate really at all. This is Project Blue Book. And they said, our explanation for what you saw is Venus. Like, really? Venus covers 10 feet over a person's head and makes them soil themselves?
Yeah, no. Well, and you're right. Blue Book was a complete sham. It was, when you start with a project to investigate something and you're automatically biased to prove it's not true, then you got trouble in paradise right there. I actually grew up in the same neighborhood as Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, so we'd heard about Blue Book and the aliens and the Roswell crash and all of that stuff growing up. I even had teachers in elementary school that would talk about this. It's like a thing. But yeah, You're right. Blue Book is what a piece of garbage that was. What can you say?
It's just a pure whitewash, a way to handle the publicity angle of this, like the Condon Committee and the Robertson panel, and frankly, the recent disclosure.
Yeah,
right.
Which is slightly different, because they did say, this is a threat, which it's not, by the way. I don't think
right.
Any good evidence for that?
I got a reference to the recent disclosure is Project Sign. The estimation of the situation in Project Sign was pretty much exactly the same playbook they used for the new UFO report.
Yeah. I don't trust them. I don't trust them as far as I can throw them, and I can't throw them. They're too heavy. I don't think we should even bother looking to our own government, or frankly, any governments, for the truth. They've lied for, 80 years, and show no signs of telling the truth. What a joke, saying, we've examined, 144 sightings, and just sightings, really? Just sightings? What about landings? What about, Roswell? What about the Edwards Air Force Base landing? What about all the gun camera footage? It's a joke. Exactly. And they're like, well, once a balloon. I'm like, okay, why do you even mention that? We think some might be Chinese or Russian or maybe even us. I'm like, wait, us? Aren't you the Pentagon? Shouldn't you know if it's us?
Sure.
Right, exactly.
And radar propagation. I'm like, wait a second. Nope. These are being cited visually. Right. So it was just layers of lies. And at the end, they did they squeaked out that word extraterrestrial. You could tell it hurt them to say it.
Yep. Well, and you're absolutely right. That the report was just pacification at best. I mean, the only thing we got out of that was, okay, these things are real. Okay, great. We already knew that. But it's just the government, every government has dug themselves such, 100-foot deep hole at this point. How do they get out of that? How do they dig their way out of it? And I think you're right. I don't think we're ever going to get the government come out and say, oh, by the way, extraterrestrials are real. Tim and I have sources and these are sources that we trust. We know beyond any reasonable doubt that there's footage that have been taken by pilots from the cockpit, from their cell phones. And this has been going on for many years now, for at least 10 years. And these are photos of these craft that are actually flying just off the wing, in many cases, in formation with military aircraft.
Right.
Now, these photographs and video snippets have been described by members of Congress that have actually seen the unclassified report as science fiction. And some of you'd seen a science fiction movie and how disturbing it was to see something like this.
Right.
And it's a pity, and it really sucks. And frankly, it's just another stain on the American government that nobody had the guts to actually come out and show us what we know already exists. Just go ahead and confirm it for everybody else,
Yeah, I think the only reason they did what they did recently is to sort of maintain some semblance of control over people's perception of the subject. It's a losing battle. Disclosure will happen. One way or another. The cat is out of the bag. It might be from a CE5 group. Might be the ETs just coming down over a major city. I mean, if Phoenix Lights happen today, all bets are off. We're done.
Sure.
Right.
And that could happen. And I think some government at some point will disclose. Disclosure will happen. I'm confident, but they're going to do it kicking and screaming the entire way. And we'll never get the whole truth from them.
Tim?
Yeah, I kind of think that right now disclosure is happening at a grassroots level from all the small UFO channels and researchers like yourself and myself and Tommy. We're out there, boots on the ground, trying to make disclosure happen in a way that people who are not believers at least have the information and can make up their minds for themselves. We just want to get the information out. That's the whole point. Yeah, and I think that's going to happen that way first.
Yeah, I love that term you use, grassroots, because I could not agree more. Because the ETs, I think, did try to disclose. There's the very famous Edwards Air Force Base meeting with President Eisenhower, which sounds outlandish, but has actually got pretty well supported evidence. And a lot of researchers are taking it very seriously. I certainly looked into it and was quite impressed. I don't think it's unique. But the point is, in that so-called meeting, alleged meeting, ETs did put forth their recommendation to disclose to all humanity. And we didn't do it. So the ETs are doing a grassroots campaign. And this is why we see schoolyard encounters and UFOs hovering over drive-in theaters and just case after case after case where they show themselves to small groups of people or large groups in some cases. This is why we had Phoenix Lights, Gulf Breeze, Hudson Valley, the Mexico City wave. France had a huge wave in 1954, I believe it was.
Mm-hmm.
That country, all those people in that year knew UFOs were real. Belgium had a wave not too long ago.
Yep.
Right, in the 90s, yeah. And Indiana had a huge wave in the 70s.
Yeah.
It would seem if ET is trying to, if they're trying to conceal themselves, they're doing a pretty bad job of it. I mean, why would you show up in a metropolitan area? Like, well, look at the incident in Chicago O'Hare. I mean, it's sitting right there for God and everybody to see, and it sat there for a while. You know, why would they do that unless they're trying to tell us something, I guess is the question.
Yeah, I think it was researcher Frank Salisbury who wrote the book, The Utah UFO Display, was the one of the first to say, oh my gosh, these guys, you know, as evasive as they are, and they are, you know, you can't just go out and see a UFO at any given moment. But they put on displays. They put on absolute publicity stunts. And I think they're trying to get us acclimatized to their presence so that at some point there will be open official contact. I think we're on the verge of it. I really do.
I actually saw one. I swear it was a UFO. It was about a week ago, 3:15 in the morning. I went out to see the Milky Way because usually that's when it's pretty clear where I live. And from the north, I saw a spherical shaped object, yellow in the center, white around the outside, and it flew by me so fast. I didn't know what it was. It was really low, 1,000 feet, maybe 1,500 feet up. Made no sound, no tail, did not blink out. I got to see it off in the distance. It was still moving. Don't know what it was, but it happened a week ago on Wednesday. And I would swear to you, by all that I've seen, that was a UFO.
Yeah, it sounds like it. We have to be very careful these days with all the drones, but drones make noise. Drones can't turn upside down. Drones can't dart at right angles or move at 1,000 miles per hour.
Right.
And the TR-3B, that's another problem. Those are relatively silent. And, I think some of what people are reporting is our own government, reverse engineered craft, so to speak.
Sure.
So we have to be very careful about what we're observing these days. But
Tommy and I did a live stream about 2 months ago where we brought out a patent list, a U.S. patent list, and a list from China and Russia that showed actual patents that had already been issued for operational vehicles that were anti-gravity. In the United States, we had a cylinder and we had a couple different discs that were on that patent list. Also, China had a couple operational flying saucers, as well as Russia. Russia has an interstellar cylinder. Now, I heard recently, I saw an article today that China is talking about building a 1 kilometer long mega-sized spacecraft.
Yeah, I heard that. Yeah,
maybe they're still working on it.
They're going to have to build that up in space, or unless they're using anti-gravity technology to get it up there. But yeah, there's no doubt we have this technology. I've talked to whistleblowers myself. There are hundreds of these guys coming out of the woodwork. One guy I interviewed was on his deathbed, and I sat on it for a while. I recently, wrote a book called Wondrous and was able to put in a few whistleblower accounts, including his. And he was, real briefly, a civilian contractor and did a job at Edwards Air Force Base and was walking by a hangar with his employer and looked inside through a window and saw a UFO. What looked like a UFO, a little saucer about the size of a small sports car, no markings, bright silver. He turns to his employer and says, "What's that?" Because he could actually hear this thrumming noise coming from there. And his employer just went, shh, wouldn't talk about it, absolutely refused to answer.
Wow. And
that's where it stayed for about a year until the same employer called the guy I interviewed back and says, "I need you for another job." And the guy interviewed says, I'm not doing it unless you tell me what we saw. And they got into this whole, he called a joking and pissing contest, had a few beers, and he got the story. And the story was that this was not a UFO, not an alien craft, but reverse engineered using alien technology, and involved counter-rotating magnets, which created a sort of a magnetic field outside the craft, which would propel the craft in the direction desired. So, yeah, that's just one whistleblower case, and there are so many.
Well, let me ask you this, Preston. I guess the big question is, what got you into this in the first place? What's the event, or what's the sighting or whatever that really drew you into this field?
Yeah, there was an inciting incident because I resisted. I mean, I've heard of UFOs. I saw, used to watch In Search Of, and I thought, no, stars are too far away. I don't believe this for a second. And did not know that several family members and friends and coworkers had seen UFOs. I had no idea, actually. But it was November 17th, I think, 1986, watching the news, and this sighting came on. This news report about a sighting over Alaska by Captain Kenju Torochi and his crew. Very famous case. It appeared on their onboard radar. FAA caught it on radar, which they later denied. It's like,
they woke Reagan up out of bed.
Yeah, this was a big sighting. But the news report was very tongue-in-cheek. They kind of joked about it, laughed nervously, and moved on. But that got me scratching my head. I'm like, because I remember vaguely that my brother had said he'd seen a UFO, and I refused to listen. My brother Mark, that was years earlier, 7 years earlier. I was just a teenager. And so I approached Mark. I'm like, Mark, tell me your UFO sighting. And he described this incredible encounter. I mean, he chased it down the road with his friends. Very low level, very close up, a saucer, colored lights, a dome on top. I knew he wasn't lying. I knew he wasn't misperceiving. I ended up talking to both his friends, and that started the ball rolling. Found out I had a number of family members. I mean, one family member saw grays. I could not believe it. I'm like, why didn't you tell me? I was upset. And she's like, would you have believed me? And I'm like, no, probably not. But yeah, people at work had missing time. Someone else saw grays. I had a friend who had missing time. This hit me hard. I was not a happy camper. I'm still trying to deal with it.
Well, I mean, the phenomenon's been around, longer than we've had a society in this country. You can look back at, the Mayans. I mean, you've got, and we've talked about this really at length on the channel many times, but you've got carvings of gray aliens. You've got, cave paintings and things like that. And these are people that lived to a ripe old age of 30 if they were lucky. They were this far away from starvation 24/7. Yet they took the time to sit down and create this carving or whatever. Now, my theory on that is, well, they were just trying to show the other villagers what they witnessed. And it just happened to be carried through history. And now we can look at it and see the same thing. But, the fact that, and I like how I think Luis Elizondo, I believe, I saw someone recently, and I don't know who I'm quoting, but said something very interesting. They said, look, this is no longer about whether or not ET is real, because if you don't think they're real, that's just denial at this point. I mean, now we have to figure out who they are, where they come from, things of that nature, because the cat's already out of the bag in terms of whether or not these things exist.
Yeah, my sympathies to any skeptics, but if you're skeptical, you haven't done your homework.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much information, it's insurmountable. I mean, if you really wrap your head around it, you learn something new every day. I mean, we still keep learning every single time we're on a live stream, interviewing people, or even researching prior to it. And it's amazing what's out there. And some of it is so far-fetched at times that it's really hard to look outside the box and realize, wait a minute, this is reality and not fake.
Yeah, there's layers and layers and layers to the subject. A lot of disinformation. That was shocking. Like, what? Our government is covering up? Why would they not tell the truth about this? And initially I was horrified. I'm like, what? People being kidnapped against their will and experimented on by gray bug-like monsters. I'm like, what is going on here? And that's why I really, doubled down and started interviewing people. I heard a quote from J.L. Hynek, who said 1 in 40 people have been taken on board. And I thought, that seems like a lot. That's what it started getting me asking everybody. And I didn't have to ask 40 people. So I think it is much more common. And now I've come to realize, no, these people aren't being kidnapped against their will and tortured. That's not what's happening at all. If ETs were truly hostile, they would have taken over long ago. They've been around forever. Think about that. And when someone is taken on board, yes, it can be very scary. And people will have often a strong fear reaction. And no one really likes a medical examination anyway, particularly by someone you don't recognize who looks a little different from you. So I think it's understandable that some people are traumatized and have nightmares and PTSD and missing time. But if you step back and if you take an objective look at what really happens when someone's taken on board, it's very encouraging. People who do not have a strong fear reaction don't have their memories wiped. No, they aren't paralyzed. They do have a physical examination. That's very common. It's probably the most common thing that happens to people. But they're often being healed. That was my first clue, like, what's going on here? They're healing us? One of my early cases involved a lady who was healed of a tumor, a cyst. And people are shown the engine room. I'm like, wow, that doesn't sound so bad. They're taken to the control room, sat in the seat, and taught how to fly the craft. Not unusual. Wow. It's not at all uncommon. And there's a very strong spiritual component to all of this too. People are given very profound spiritual information. It's all about healing, or clairvoyance, or past life recall, or even levitation, and just a wide variety of paranormal events that people experience. I ended up researching all aspects of the paranormal because of this. But yeah, I am convinced that now, I'm very much encouraged about why these guys are here and what their agenda is.
You've written a book on alien healing, and can you tell us more about that? It sounds like you've got quite a bit of experience with people that have actually been healed by the aliens.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this topic because I don't think it gets nearly enough attention. There's a very strong threat narrative being put forth that's absolutely unwarranted and unsupported by evidence. And I was in this field for about 10 years and had written a bunch of articles, 30 or 40 at this time. Now it's up over 100. But I was going to write another article because I had interviewed this lady, who I'll call Wendy, who described being healed of a tumor or a cyst. She had been diagnosed with a cyst in her fallopian tubes and had an encounter the night before surgery. Went to the doctor and they're like, well, this is strange. Your cyst is gone. And there's fluid here that's only present after you've had surgery. You went and had surgery, didn't you? And she said, no, I sure didn't. She kind of knew what had happened, but she didn't want to say. Rarely do witnesses tell their doctors the truth about this, for good reason. Some have been put in mental institutions. But I heard about this case and I'm like, wow, this is amazing, because I knew of a couple of other cases. There's a very famous case in Damon, Texas, where 2 police officers were driving along. One of them was struck by a beam of light, and it healed his finger of a flesh wound. He had been bitten by a baby alligator, and boom, healed instantly. Very well authenticated case.
Wow.
And there's another very famous case researched by Jacques Vallée involving a medical doctor, actually, who had a UFO hover outside his home. He was struck by a beam of light, and it cured him of 2 conditions. He was partially paralyzed from injuries from the Algerian War, and also had gashed his ankle open with an axe 2 days earlier and had this very serious wound on his foot. Struck by this beam of light, wakes up the next morning, and the wound is gone, and so is his paralysis.
Wow.
So I'm looking at these cases. I'm like, this would make an interesting article. I knew of another case which took place in Peru involving a customs official. Went onto his veranda, struck by a beam of light from a UFO that was way up there. It sent on these 2 thin purple beams of light, which struck him on the face and chest. dazzled him, left him disoriented. He stumbled inside. He was severely myopic, very nearsighted, and had to remove his glasses to see. His vision had been cured instantly.
Wow.
And he had rheumatism too, and that cleared up right away. So I was looking at these cases and others. I'm like, yeah, okay. I know of a good 5 or 10 cases. This is going to make a great article. And I dug a little deeper and I found like 30 cases. I'm like, wow, this is not going to fit into an article. And that ended up being my first book, UFO Healings, which I published in 1996, which proved to be really popular. And I got so many people coming up to me. I mean, every time I spoke on that subject, literally every time, I'm not even exaggerating, someone would say, that happened to me. They healed me of, an infected tattoo, of deafness, of, warts, and just went on and on. And I started collecting these stories throughout the years, and just recently put out another book, very recently, which is called The Healing Power of UFOs. And I have 300 cases.
Wow.
It's the tip of the iceberg, I'm telling you. And what is amazing about these cases, I don't know why they haven't gotten more attention, because John Mack has cases. Bud Hopkins has cases. I talked to him personally. David Jacobs has many. He talked about people cured of pneumonia, of diphtheria. Barbara Lamb has several. Yvonne Smith. Edith Fiore, first person with a PhD to write a book on abductions, said half of the people, 50%, that she interviewed reported healings of everything from minor infections to cancer. Every major researcher, pretty much without exception, has these cases.
Why does it seem, though, that the cases are kind of selective?
Selective, how do you mean?
I mean, not everyone that has a malady or a problem has healing events from these ETs. I mean, it seems almost selective.
Yeah, that was a big question of mine. It's very selective. Bud Hopkins complained about that. He said he had a lot of clients who are having contact and aren't being healed. And it's a little hard to figure out. I do know one lady who was healed of injuries sustained in a car accident. And the ETs told her she had actually died in this accident. Her brain stem was severed, they told her, and that they would repair it, and they did. And
Wow.
put her back in the scene of the accident and said, we can't fix everything because some of these injuries are karmic. And I started to hear that again. I heard that several times from these reports. So that could be one reason. I think a lot of people are being healed, and it's being attributed to angels or spontaneous remission, this sort of thing. I think they're wiser than to heal everybody, because we have a lot of problems with population control as it is. It's hard to say. I did find patterns, though, as to who is being healed and why.
Have you ever come across in your research?
Well, hang on.
Sorry.
Let's the patterns. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, because this was bothering me. I'm like, why are some people being healed and not others? I mean, I could use a healing. And I wrote the book. Why not me? And what I found was it is evenly divided between men and women. So that wasn't it. Had nothing to do with religion or blood type or race or education or geography, or gosh, I was starting to run out of, clues here. And what I did find was that people who have a history of contact, it follows families.
Yeah.
If you're being abducted, chances are good your parents were, grandparents, your children. About 50% of the people who are being healed have a history of contact. There's a small portion of people who are friends of contactees, who somehow got a little, bleed through there and were healed. But the other pattern I found, and this shocked me, and it absolutely is a pattern, because I was looking at the John Hunter Gray case, and he was driving through Richland Center, Wisconsin, had an abduction by Grays. It was very typical, physical examination, ejections, spontaneously remembered it without hypnosis a couple of weeks later, but it was initially missing time. and had a bunch of physiological improvements. I thought that's interesting. And he was a social worker, had won a bunch of awards. And that kind of rang an alarm bell in my head because I had just heard of another case involving a social worker. So I started looking at profession. I'm like, well, here's a case involving a police officer. Here's an awful lot of doctors, a lot of teachers, a lot of environmentalists, inventors. And so I started to look at profession. And what I found, artists, musicians, ETs are contacting and healing people who are doing good work for humanity in some capacity. Now, it's a kind of a loose pattern, but it absolutely exerted itself. I mean, one lady I interviewed in Norway, she said, no history of UFO encounters at all. Had Greys come into her room, scared the living daylights out of her. She's screaming at them, what are you doing? Why are you here? Who are you? Ah! And they were flipping her around like a rag doll, she said. Pressed her, flipped her onto her stomach, pressed something against her back, and filed right out through the wall and took off. And she tells me this story. It's very interesting. I'm like, well, what do you do for a living? She says, well, I was initially a graphics artist. I'm retired now, but when they did it, I was working, and I had a very severe back injury, and I couldn't work, and they healed it. I'm like, wow. She says, but please don't use my name because I'm very, very active in my country in the animal rights and human rights movement. I'm like, there you go. There it is again. They love those social workers. They love those environmentalists.
So the do-gooders, basically.
Yep. They're helping people who are helping others. Another reason why I think, this is good news for humanity.
It's interesting. Well, let me ask you this. What's your favorite case of all of them? I mean, I'm sure they're the kind of guy, you've done so much research. Do you have one that just, really kind of elevates above all the rest for you personally?
Oh, that's a very difficult question because I love them all. It's like trying to pick between your children, but there are some that absolutely rise above the rest. Gosh, which one? One case that's very, very well verified involves a lady who was actually a house worker, a maid for a official in, where was it? Brazil, I believe it was. And she was suffering from Chagas disease, which is caused by the bite of the triotonin beetle and causes inflammation of the heart and is often fatal. And she was suffering badly, and she was not expected to survive. And the guy who she was working for was actually a contactee and asked the ETs telepathically if they could do a healing. And they said, yes, bring her to this remote area and we will do it. And he did. And they showed up. And this was viewed by a crowd of people. She was put forth. She stepped forward and was healed by these human-looking ETs. And they have the doctor's reports before and after. They went through the whole UFO circuit and did a whole presentation on this. It's an absolutely, undeniably well-verified case. One of my favorite. But there are so many. And there's the case of Helena Charbonneau of France, who was suffering from severe pancreatic cancer and was expected to die. They did an operation, couldn't get rid of all of it, and ended up spreading throughout her body. And she became so weak, she was bedbound. And they expected her to die within like 3 days. So she says, I want to die at home. Please let me go home. And they allowed her to go home to die. And she got this very strong mental message calling her name. And she stumbled outside and managed to get into her car and drive out of town and came upon a landed UFO. She was pulled on board and healed. She said it was an excruciatingly painful operation. And they used all lights. They used lasers. They opened her up. It took a while. And they told her, do not take any medicine that the doctors are giving you. Just drink water and you will survive. And she asked, why did you heal me? They said, we were requested to do so, Turned out she had a friend who was a contactee who apparently had asked them. And she was returned to the hospital because she started throwing up and getting really sick. And the doctors called in the priest for last rites. The family gathered around, but she rallied. She just somehow clung to life. And her skin was orange at this point. She was so sick. She was like 90 pounds. And she got better and better and better and was healed. Absolutely healed. Now,
have you ever come across people that haven't necessarily been healed, but have actually had an encounter and then either got sick or had something manifest that never would have manifested before?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's not uncommon. A lot of people report eye problems, eye strain, light sensitivity. Some people have what amounts to radiation burns. Or like, where did you get this laser scar? What is this? Implants. And yeah, some people have suffered medically as a result of a UFO encounter. I cannot deny that. But I'm not so sure it's necessarily intentional, whereas these healing cases often seem to be intentional. Mm-hmm. One lady, she was suffering from total kidney failure, did not have a history of encounters, and prayed to God and Jesus and the angels to heal her. And what happened was she was having a lot of trouble urinating and felt really bad and didn't realize what was wrong with her. Went to the emergency room, and the doctor's like, oh my God, or not the emergency room, her physician. And her physician's like, go to the emergency room right now. You are having total renal failure. You're going to die if you don't get help right now. So she rushed home and called her family and says, I am in trouble. Pray for me. Called her employer, says, I can't come to work. Pray for me. I'm, very ill. Called her friends. Pray for me. I'm going to the doctor right now. And fell asleep on her bed. Woke up in the middle of the night to these short, kind of brown-skinned humanoids, not grays, just weird humanoids, massaging her abdominal area. She was sort of in and out of consciousness. They were there for a while. Woke up the next morning feeling great. Went to the bathroom. Drove to her doctor's office. Said, hey, I'm feeling much better. And he was, shocked. Could not believe it. And he says, what happened? She says, I think the angels came and healed me. She kind of knew it wasn't, but she didn't want to tell everyone, oh my gosh, aliens came. So she told everyone it was angels. And it was 2 months later, she was taken on board, presumably because she was in a round room on a table. And ETs were holding this instrument over her, which I've heard described and read described from other witnesses. It's this sort of thing, kind of like Travis Walton described. It's this sort of round, sort of curved, metallic, flat instrument, which they hold over you, and it displays your organs in full holographic color. And they showed her kidneys. And they're like, look, your kidneys are doing really well. They look healthy. And they were going through her other organs, and they said, here's your liver. Look at all those black spots. Do you see those black spots? And she's like, yeah, I do see them. And they said, your liver is unhealthy. You need to stop drinking Diet Coke. It is hurting you. So they actually will dispense dietary advice. Not the only case like that. Grays told one lady, you're too fat. You need to stop eating fatty foods. She hates the Grays. She was not happy. Did not want to be called fat by these Grays.
Wow, that's outstanding.
Yeah, one guy was told, you need to stop smoking marijuana. This is not the life we had planned for you. So
interesting.
Yeah. Crazy.
Well, yeah, that's incredibly interesting. And that's just, if the Grays are, or even the aliens, if they're actually out there, that's an intelligent thing. They're actually picking and choosing who they're going to heal. And it looks like, from what you're describing, is that they're going for people that are what they think are humanity's best shot, or what they can do, or people that can do the most for humanity, apparently. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, I think they are maintaining their contacts, people who are helping them out with creating perhaps hybrid babies, or people whose genetic lines they're following. But definitely people who are helping humanity. There was one case I researched where an elderly couple was, they thought they were abducted in Sedona. They had this UFO following their car, and then suddenly they're following it and it's circling around them. And then it lands in a field next to their car and disappears. And they get to their hotel room, and it's a couple of hours later than it should be. They end up going under hypnosis. The husband couldn't recall anything. He was blocked. But the wife recalled them both being not abducted, but invited on board by friendly, largely human-looking ETs. They were bald. They did have large, dark eyes, but looked largely human. It was very sparse inside. And she asked, "Where are you from?" And they said, "Well, we're from a place that you don't know about yet." And they said, "Why are you contacting us?" And they said, "Well, we're helping people who are helping humanity. And we can't help too much because it's up to you to solve your own problems." Well, this couple, actually lived in Hawaii and were natural homeopathic healers, and were very successful and very famous in their community. Very philanthropic people. I think that's why they were being healed. I honestly do.
Interesting. Very interesting. The other thing that we understand is you're really well versed in USOs, underwater, sightings and things of that nature. We were kind of hoping maybe if we could ask you about that. Some of your books, talk about that phenomenon, and can you tell us what you know about it?
Yeah, USOs is an unidentified submersible object, which is essentially the same as a UFO until it hits the water, and then it's a USO. Mm-hmm. And you can't really call it a UFO because it's not flying. To me, UFO means alien craft. But yeah, USO is an unidentified submersible object. And I got cases from the beginning, way back in 1986. Well, 88 is when I really started buckling down. But I was introduced to this phenomenon in 86. And I got this case right off the Pacific Coast Highway here in Southern California of this an unidentified floating object, I guess you would call it, because it was on the surface of the ocean. And the lady who saw it says, "Hey, look," to the person who was driving, "What do you think that is?" Because it didn't look normal. And he turns and looks, and this thing takes off straight up. And that was my first sort of USO case, and started getting more, and often in this one area off the Southern California coast. And I collected a good 10 or 20 of them, of objects, going very fast under the water, sometimes targeting boats, going right under the boat as if on purpose, but diving into the water, coming out of the water, sometimes both. There was a very famous case which took place over the ocean in Long Beach, where the Japanese steamship Aliki saw what they thought was a fireball. This was like 1961 or thereabouts. It comes diving down into the water, and then it comes out and flies away. So not a fireball. So yeah, a lot of cases in this one area. And I ended up doing a chapter in my book, UFOs Over California, on ocean-going UFOs is what I called them. And to publicize the book, I thought I would excerpt that chapter and do a little more research into it. And I started to really wonder if there's a base down there or something. Because I talked to a couple of people who'd been taken, not into a UFO. They were taken from this area into what appears to be an underground or perhaps an undersea base. And some of these cases of these USOs involve not one or two objects or even 10 or 20, but I'm talking dozens, 40, 50. There are 3 cases involving over 100 objects coming up from below. So I really started wondering, what is going on here? Is there a parking lot down there? What the heck? And that's how I kind of got introduced to the subject. Started to get asked to speak about it, spoke about it for MUFON, got a bunch of cases, ended up going on the History Channel, their show Deep Sea UFOs, and turned out to be their highest rated show ever up to that time. So they called me back again and again for another episode of UFO Hunters, and it just sort of snowballed from there. And I collected over 150 cases just off the California coast, the Santa Catalina Channel. Boy, did I get some amazing cases from all over the world. Oh gosh, is there one? Could I tell you about what happened on the USS Clamagore?
Please. Sure.
Oh my God, this is probably my favorite USO case that I ever researched. This gentleman by the name of Ray Sachs, retired, an elderly gentleman, really wanted to do his part for disclosure and describe what happened to him when he was stationed on the submarine, the USS Clamogore. He joined the Navy at a young age and had been on a number of submarines, but finally got put on the Clamogore, which actually carried nuclear-tipped torpedoes.
Wow.
And if you know anything about UFOs, they are watching over anything nuclear. I've got a number of cases to speak to that. But at any rate, he's an electrician's mate on the USS Clamogore. Ray Sachs is his name. And one evening in 1971, the Clamogore is heading up the East Coast on the surface of the ocean at night at about 12 knots. And this USO comes booking in underwater from the stern at about 100 knots. And it's right below the surface there, and comes and starts pacing the USS Clamogore, just 50, 100 feet away, far, far too close for any other conventional sea craft. As anyone who's in the marine industry knows, or you do not approach a boat within a quarter mile. You just don't do it. It's exceedingly dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
And this thing was right up next to them. And Ray Sachs was on deck with another petty officer and the commander and the second in command. They all saw it. And the commander turns to Ray Sachs, his job was to be in touch with the sonar room, and says, "What is it? Do the sonar people see anything?" And they didn't. It was not appearing on sonar. And Ray Sachs kind of jokes to the captain, "Well, maybe it's Captain Nemo." Captain did not think that was funny, the commander. And one by one, the higher ranking officers came on board and looked at this thing because they all wanted to see it. It was totally silent, a bright, bright white light, round. And after about 15 minutes, it took off in another direction at about an estimated 80 knots and was gone. And the second in command turns to the commander and says, "Sir," this is according to Ray Sachs, "Sir, how would you like me to write this down in the log?" And the commander says, "Officers who write this sort of event down in the logbooks do not move up in rank." So it was not recorded in the logs. They rarely are. I have to believe the commander did report this to his superiors. I'm sure he did. I don't know. But this is an amazing case. And it was the commander ordered them, "Do not talk about it." Ray Sachs didn't sign anything, never signed any non-disclosure agreement. And when he went below deck, finally, he was besieged by all his fellow submarine mates and who wanted to know what they saw. So, of course, it was the buzz of the ship for weeks. And not the only weird thing that happened. One time the submarine completely went off power, which can't happen. They've got double, triple safety backups. Mm-hmm. And something turned off that submarine, completely freaked out everybody on board.
Wow, that's interesting. The recent report that was released by the government, one of the things that they looked at, and Tim and I are also aware of this from our sources, but one of the things that they looked into was also USOs. They basically reported UFOs or whatever phenomenon that were reported in the ocean, under the ocean, by submarines, by surface ships, things of that nature. And then there's very compelling evidence that these things are moving underwater much faster than anything that we can make conventionally as a humanity, as a species. And that's more information that they're withholding. It's something else that we didn't get that we know exists. It's so frustrating.
Yeah. I did my research into this, and the government was looking into developing flying submarines way back in, I think it was the 50s, actually.
Yep.
And I don't know how far along they got. It's clearly confidential. But judging from what people are seeing, I don't think it's us, because we don't have anything that can go in and out of the water in perfect silence or move underwater. I did talk to some Navy guys about how fast submarines can move. And, off the record, they said that we do have stuff that moves faster than is officially possible, which is, under 100 knots, but we don't have anything that can move over 100 knots. And some of these craft are described zipping through the ocean like they do through the sky.
Mm-hmm.
Very fast.
Yeah, there was a Russian research program going on for a while where they quoted seeing ghost submarines that were charted moving as fast as 400 knots, which we all know is impossible, especially back in the day when they were doing this investigation, which is back in the early 90s.
Right. Yeah, I think they're down there in the ocean because they can. They have a technology which must have a force field around it, which pushes the molecules away. I am not sure how they do it, but for that matter, they can go into the water and the ground. There are cases of people seeing UFOs dive into the ground, and the ground seems to open up. And this makes sense. I mean, we have ETs walking through walls, pulling people through walls. They have technology that can render solid objects permeable. So, and we know their beams of light are very advanced. They can levitate people. They can heal people with beams of light. That's their primary method. They can cause injury with beams of light. They can paralyze people with beams of light. They can transmit knowledge. They have an understanding of the electromagnetic spectrum that far exceeds our own. And I think that's how they're doing it with their understanding of electromagnetism and gravity and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, they can, like you said, to your point, I mean, they can just go from one medium to the other with I mean, ease. I mean, there's no problem at all. They can go from the atmosphere and dive into the water in one fell swoop, one move, without slowing down or anything else. Now, human technology, we not even close. We don't have anything close to that. Our materials that we create, I mean, even the strongest materials that we can build would not be able to withstand that. And I agree with you. I think that we're talking about some sort of a force field here, and I think that's what makes this whole thing possible. From the fact that they can go from one media to the other so easily, also that they can take off and fly and zoom around without breaking the sound barrier. So there's got to be some sort of field there.
I love these guys, these ETs. They're so advanced. And I have to tell you, having talked to many, many contactees, I don't like the word abductees. Don't think it's accurate. Many of them call them, friends. Many of them think of them as family. And I think that's absolutely true. Yeah, they're not coming down and healing everybody. They're not stopping a lot of our disasters and our problems. But as every parent knows, you cannot tie your children's shoes for them. You cannot spoon feed them. You cannot do everything for them. They have to learn through the school of hard knocks. And I think they do intervene and will intervene when it's necessary or helpful. But ultimately, it's up to us to solve our own problems. And that's why, we're dealing with so much, problems. It's up to us. They've given us free will to do this. But they are out there in very large numbers and are intervening in a very, I guess, maybe I don't want to use the word subtle, but very quietly intervening in a very broad and they're saturated in our society. They are the watchers. They are watching over everything. They are intervening in a very large scale. It's just largely invisible.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Right. Well, even the military have reported several incidents where the UFOs seem to know where the planes were supposed to rally, their rally point or whatever. It's like they were reading or listening to their communications or whatever. And that's one of the, I think it's the gimbal incident. I believe they're talking about that.
Yeah.
Who knows what they have the technology to know about us? They could know every single thing about us from the history, from the dawn of humanity, and probably do.
Yeah, they're also spiritually advanced. I mean, they can do telepathy. When people see an ET, floating, that's not necessarily being done by technology. These are very spiritually advanced people, and they are people. And some contactees get really mad if you call them creatures or, figures or all these terms we have for them. And they call them people. And that's, I think, accurate. They are very much more like us than different. And some are exactly like us. I mean, I do hear mostly grays, but grays are essentially human. Their genetics has been degraded to some degree from radiation due to space travel. This is the story that's coming from the contactees. But we have grays, we have human-looking ETs, we have praying mantises, quite common, actually. I've got very few reptilian accounts, but they do turn up. But strange humanoids is another very common category. But they all have eyes, they've got ears and nose. They're very much humanoid. So that really, I think, speaks to our relationship with them. It's much closer.
I heard that a humanoid shape is pretty universal throughout the galaxy.
Yeah, yep. I scoured the UFO literature looking for anything that's not humanoid, and there's a few. There's a case, I think, gosh, where was it? Somewhere in Europe. I forget where, involving a blob like alien, like the blob. But generally speaking, no. I mean, even robotic figures are described as humanoid. So that is absolutely universal. And I think Star Trek got it right. I hate to say it, Star Trek actually kept me out of the UFO field. I'm like, no, what people are reporting sounds like Star Trek to me. I don't believe it. But this is what the evidence is showing us. To deny, I mean, just because it doesn't fit our preconceptions, that's not scientific. We really have to throw away our preconceptions, our misconceptions, and look at the evidence objectively.
Right. Have you heard what Benny Rich of Lockheed Martin Skunk Works said when he said, we have the technology to take ET home?
Yeah.
And if Star Trek has done it, or Star Wars has done it, we've done it already, we've moved beyond it.
Yes, boy, that's intriguing to know that our military has, rooms filled with this technology. Going back to UFO healing cases, there are a number of whistleblowers who've talked about this, because there's a very strong medical theme that runs through UFO accounts. People are examined, they're healed, and there's these lights that can open you up and sew you back up. And some of this technology has been removed from these so-called crash retrievals. And from what I'm hearing from a few of these whistleblower sources, is we have technology that is very much like Star Trek. Open people up with a light and heal wounds. There's this little device that's like a little jewel which you can place on a person's body, and it slides over and holographically displays any tumor or cyst in a person's body. There's anti-aging technology. I heard a report coming out of Area 51 that a number of the workers there have been implanted with ET technology that allows them to live far longer than the average human and boosts their immunity and improves their health in a number of different ways. This technology is being used on a limited basis by our own government. And that makes me very nervous, because if this sort of gets into military hands and we start a war, this could be disastrous.
Well, we've spoken about that on the show before, the balance of power factor on the planet. And let's assume for a moment, and I do believe Bob Lazar, but let's assume that Bob Lazar is actually being honest, telling the truth, and that we do in fact have in our possession at least 9 different ET vehicles. Well, if we were to come out and disclose that, or if that were to come out, well, then you've got the other superpowers on the planet, like China and Russia. That's sort of technology. If you come out and said, okay, well, we've got something that's 10,000 years ahead of anything you have, that could cause a problem internationally. And I think that's probably one, in my opinion, that's one of the many reasons that the government's keeping a lid on all of this.
Yeah, it's my understanding the major governments are working together on this subject and cooperating. But I do know that some of the stuff, I don't know, but these are the reports that are coming out, is very advanced, and it's so advanced we don't understand a bit of it. I mean, there are, coming from these whistleblower accounts, there are UFOs in our possession which we can't even get inside. We cannot open them, and some of them we open up and I'm like, "Where's the engine room? How do you fly this thing?"
Right. There's no electronics inside. It's all smooth.
Right, because these craft are alive. And this is something that a lot of contactees talk about, and it's not super well known, even in the UFO community. But these craft are essentially what we would think of as AI. and are embodied and are alive as we would think of it. So the way they're flown is through empathy and psychic connections.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why I think we have so many contactees who are being placed in the chair and told how to fly it. And that's what they'd say. You psychically hook up with this UFO ship. And that's how a lot of these craft are being flown. And this just, again, goes right in line with contactees who, by and large, are very psychically developed. And the nicest people, by the way. I mean, they are just really wonderful people.
Very interesting. Well, and you're based on your own research, how many different ET species would you have a guess that we're dealing with here?
There's been a lot of speculation about this. And I would say that's a very difficult question to answer because so many people describe what I would say are unique beings that I've never heard before or since. A number of people contact me like, have you heard of anything like this? This lady described a 9-foot tall, orange-haired, largely human-looking ET, but it's had this giant chin, huge eyes, giant forehead. Another guy described 10-foot tall beings. A number of people describe these unique beings. So I'm going to say there's probably 10 major types, 5 or 10. There's the grays, and there's about 3 or 4 or 5 variations of those. But I think they're probably all related, or perhaps very much the variation is like we see the variation in the human species, probably all one species. But grays, praying mantis, human-looking ETs, little short blue beings, and strange humanoids. And I'm going to say that it's infinite. I mean, it's such a large universe. It's very hard to count these guys, but some estimates have been upwards of 50 different species. And I wouldn't doubt it for a second. But absolutely, it's mostly grays in my own research. And I think that's borne out by other researchers like Barbara Lamb and Bud Hopkins and John Mack and others. But yeah, it's just maddeningly unique sometimes.
We actually have a question from the chat room, and they have a question for Preston. Are they in our daily lives? Could he talk about it and explain?
Yeah, I think they are. And even people who might not even believe in UFOs are probably having some level of contact. I talked about earlier how I think contact is much more common than people realize. 1 in 40, that quote from John Hynek was actually verified later by the Roper organization, who did a survey and said that they found 1 in 50 people show the markers of alien contact. And I've talked to people, and they told me about these incredible synchronicities in their lives where they're guided. And I've experienced this myself. In my latest book, Wondrous, there are at least 4 cases in there where the people feel, including my own brother and sister-in-law, were brought together. They're both experiencers. There's a case involving a guy from Montana and a lady from Nevada who got married and late in life found out that they were both seeing these same cat-like ETs. A lady in Florida is absolutely convinced that she was set up by the ETs, ET dating service, with her husband. They do intervene. Bud Hopkins has cases like these. He's talked about it. These 2 ladies wrote a book about their case. It's called Connections. They were taken on board as kids from separate parts of the U.S. and played with each other and met later as adults and recognized each other. This is the sort of guidance that they are putting forth in people's lives. I think there are, the whole science fiction movement, which came about at the turn of the century, very close to the modern age of UFOs, was probably largely inspired by ETs. I mean, Star Trek got so much stuff right. You have to wonder about Gene Roddenberry.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, I think this is happening in people's lives. Contact comes in a variety of ways. It can be purely telepathic. It can be purely inspirational. It can be a simple sighting with telepathic contact. One lady in my latest book, Wondrous, she's had 2 sightings. One has a young girl, age 5, and she's like, hi. She's talking to them, and they acknowledged her, sort of flashed their lights or moved around. She doesn't quite remember, but came back again when she was a teenager. And she says, hi, it's you again. Oh my God, I know you guys. And she got this message like, hello, we know who you are. We've been watching you. We will see you again. And she had a profound psychic boost and became this sort of new age crystal healer and aura healings and, Reiki type and psychic reader. And that turns up over and over again. So even a simple sighting, is my point, can have a profound effect and will change a person's life. For some, it's just, oh, here we are, we're real, and that's enough.
Right.
But yeah, I think they are affecting people, and many probably don't even know it. You may not believe in UFOs. You may think, this has nothing to do with me. I got news for you. It has everything to do with all of us.
They might believe in you.
Right.
They do. They're watching, and they are doing their best to save us from destroying our own planet, which we're doing, by the way. We are. Sure. I mean, they are so mad about nuclear power. That's their number one message. Like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Stop this nuclear madness.
I've also heard that they can't believe that we bury our garbage. That really blows their minds, apparently.
Yeah, they're doing their best. I think that they've got multiple agendas, right? They are absolutely creating hybrid babies. That's an agenda. They are trying to get us off fossil fuels. They're trying to warn us about pollution and our warlike ways and nuclear power. But their main agenda is trying to get people to wake up. And by that, I mean psychically. We should be telepathic. That is our natural state. On some level, we are telepathic. This is how kind of mob behavior and the 100th monkey effect really works. We are telepathic with each other, but our consciousness has become compartmentalized. We should all remember our past lives. We should all remember that we're going out of body every night. We should remember all this stuff, and they're really doing their darndest to get us to sort of break down those barriers and become fully complete, fully spiritualized, enlightened and evolved human beings. Yeah, that's their mission.
I gotta say this: out of all the planets in the galaxy, in the universe, why us?
Yeah, well, why not us? I think we're like the average person who runs across someone who needs help will help them. If you see someone who's tripped, you automatically run to help them up.
Right.
You help the people who are around you. And the universe is not empty. It's not, like people think it is. It is crowded. It is filled with people. And we're largely in quarantine, I think, because of our warlike ways. We're dangerous.
Savages.
They are trying to, they are giving us free will, but they're doing their darndest to, help us through these difficult times. Because we're screwing things up.
Yep.
Yes, we are.
Well, it's like we always say here on the channel. If we look up in the night sky and come to find out that the humanity is the only game in town, that's just depressing. That couldn't be more depressing. Because you're right, we mess up everything we touch. We're still very primitive, races. It's like that Japanese scientist always says, he's got the scale of civilizations. We're not even a 1 yet. Because we are still burning fuels and things like that. And you're right. I mean, I'm sure if you were to take a look at, if you were another species, a more advanced species, and you were to do a flyby of Earth and take a look at what's going on, probably would be a lot of different reasons for concern, I should think.
Yeah. I think they do care about us. I think, they are respecting our free will. I would very gladly welcome our alien overlords. Honestly, I would. I think they could do a better job. But at the state we're at now, there's going to be a portion of the population who's going to worship them. There is a portion of the population who think they're demonic. They seriously believe this.
Right. Right.
I studied demonology, by the way, because I'm like, oh gosh, we better look into this.
Mhm.
No, they're not demons. Are you out of your mind? No, no, they are trying to help people. And my heart goes out to people who are being traumatized by this. But my message to them would be to step back, take a deep breath, and try to overcome your fear, because they are not trying to scare people. The very first words out of their mouth is, do not be afraid. Out of their minds, I should say. They usually speak telepathically. Do not be afraid. We won't hurt you. And when someone is taken on board, yes, it can be scary, very scary. And they will knock you unconscious if you're in a complete panic, which many people are. And they will put you back. And this poor person thinks, oh, they're evil. They took me. Did you see what they look like? They stuck a needle in me. And that's all they remember. And they didn't get to the good stuff. And people like Barbara Lamb and Dolores Cannon and others will tell you it gets better. Once you overcome your fear and once you start remembering what actually happened. There are no accounts of sadism. I don't want to say none, but I don't have any. They're they're not sadistic, trying to hurt or scare people or torture people. I have no accounts of that.
Curiosity or some other agenda, but if they wanted to cause harm, I mean, they've got the person there to cause harm. They could have done it, and they didn't. So they let this person go and live their life. Now, obviously that their intent is not hostile, because they did let the person go, right?
Yep. Well, usually some people, it appears, choose to stay. I had one case where I investigated, this is in my book, Onboard UFO Encounters, probably my most successful book, where a group of 6 or 7 young men, 19, 20, 21, would go out to the high desert, and one of them had a cabin there, and they just hang out for the weekend, drinking beers and having fun. And one of the guys, Paul was his name, disappears. And they're about to send out a search party when he comes back, hours later. And he's like, oh man, I came upon a landed UFO. You guys aren't going to believe it. And they're like, really? No, you're lying. He's like, no, honest to God. I interviewed one of these guys, Tony, who was there. And Paul described this, briefly, this encounter where he's taken on board by friendly, largely human-looking ETs. They were very nice to him, showed him around, said, we're studying this area. He said they were all dressed in white jumpsuits, had large dark eyes, and were bald, but looked very much human. So the inside of their ship was all white, super clean. And they're like, you want to come with us? You can, but you won't be able to come back. And he said, no, thanks for the offer, but no. That kind of freaked him out that they did that. And they said, okay, well, we're going to be back here next year at this time. In case you're interested, we will be here. And this is the story he told. And long story short, a year goes by, and he starts giving away all his stuff. And the guy I interviewed, Tony, says, what are you doing? Are you going out there? Are you going to go with him? And Paul's like, I don't know, but I'm going to go out there. I'm going to check it out. I want to see if they really show up. And he did. He went out there, drove up alone. This is the Palm Springs, Palmdale area, that Southern California desert area. And doesn't come back. He didn't come back. And so his friends drive out there with Paul's family, and they found his car. This is like exactly what happened to that country singer, Jim Sullivan. Another case very much like this. Keys were in the car, never saw Paul again. Police were called. It was a whole missing persons case. They told the police, this is what happened. I don't know what to tell you. Or UFO. So I have to believe, Paul is somewhere out there. But yeah, sometimes they don't come back. There was a case over Lake Superior where Felix Moncla, a Navy guy, you heard of this case?
Yep.
Yeah.
The blip lurges,
And then
the blip, boom, UFO takes off. Felix Moncla, haven't seen him since.
not a shred of wreckage found.
Yeah, I sure wonder about that guy. He was like 22 years old, young man.
Yeah.
I wonder. Or Frederick Valentic.
Yeah, Valentis, yeah.
Off of Australia. Man, what a case. Same thing. UFO hovers over him, and he was in conversation with the control tower. Never seen again. people in
Yep,
that
go
area
on.
saw UFOs too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yep.
Well, listen, Preston, it has been very enlightening, sir, having you on here. We want to thank you for coming on board the show with us today. And, just you have very interesting stories, folks. I've actually posted the link to Preston's website out there. Make sure you get out there and check that out. Check out all his offerings, buy some of his books. I mean, the guy, he's a very prolific writer. His style is just very easy to follow and read and understand. And I really highly recommend it. Tim?
Here are some of his books. Just giving you a rundown on some of his books: UFOs over New Mexico, Undersea UFO Base, UFOs over New York, several other ones as well. If you go to Amazon, pick one up, take a read, go over to his website, give him a like and a thumbs up. Make sure you support this man, because we really need to keep him within the ufology community. It's important that we keep him out there.
Yep.
Here's more books. I think I may have repeated one here. So you got one in, it looks like French.
That's right. I got one in Icelandic too.
Wow.
Gestir
cool.
utan ergeinum. It's the only Icelandic I speak.
Outstanding.
That's the title, Extraterrestrial Visitations.
So please go visit Preston Dennett, his website. It's very important. We need to keep him active in the community. And if you want to reach out to him for an interview, you got to contact him at his contact information.
Thanks,
Yeah,
guys.
Thanks again for coming, sir. It's been wonderful. Folks, thanks again for everybody coming out. Do us a big favor. Go ahead and hit that like button for us. We really appreciate that. If you could leave us maybe a comment, that would be good as well. And also, please don't forget to share out our link whenever you get a chance on your social media. It really helps us grow the channel, and we really appreciate that. Thank you.
Right. And thank you very much to everybody on the panel, Preston, Tommy, for being here and having a great live show. Everybody who watched online and everybody who's in the chat room, thank you as well. And from all of us, good night.